Hello, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's virtual event, Social Issues and Social Justice. How can the psychological study of social issues rise to meet the challenges of our present moment? My name is Sarah Mancall, and I'm the Policy Director here at SPSSI. We are the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, and if you're part of the broader APA community, you'll also know us as APA Division 9, and we are a member of the Divisions for Social Justice within APA. A few quick logistical points before we get started today. On your screen, you should see and be able to hear from all of our panelists. This is in Zoom webinar, so all attendees are in view and listen only mode. That said, we would love to hear from you. So if you have questions, if you have comments to share, thoughts to echo, please enter them in the chat so that we can see them, and we will be able to pull questions as we have room for them. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please also message me and I'll try to troubleshoot. I would also like to mention that today's event is being recorded and we will be posting it to SPSSI's YouTube channel tomorrow so that anyone who misses the event can watch it later at their convenience. And now to our main event. Our host and moderator today is Dr. Stephanie Fryberg. She serves as SPSSI's president, SPSSI's 2019-2020 president. She is a member of the Tulalip Tribes of Washington State and is the University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor of Psychology at the University of Michigan. On the policy front, I want to mention a few special things about Dr. Fryberg. She provided testimony to the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs regarding the impact of racist stereotypes on Indigenous people and was lead psychologist on the 2009 amicus brief for Susan S. Harjo et al. Versus Pro Football Inc., and served as an expert witness in the Keep Siegel versus U.S. Department of Agriculture class action lawsuit. If you've been following the news over the last few months, you may have also read about Dr. Fryberg's work because she's been one of the major experts weighing in on the decision to rename the Washington, D.C. football team. So Dr. Fryberg, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening for this virtual event on social issues and social justice. How can the psychological study of social issues rise to meet the challenges of our present moment? I want to begin today by thanking Sarah and the rest of the SPSSI staff. It's very much the case that this would not have happened with all of their tremendous efforts. I have had the privilege of working with Sarah on a couple of large SPSSI initiatives, and I cannot understate what a tremendous asset she is to the organization and to our larger mission of using science to benefit the greater good. So thank you again, Sarah. I'm very grateful for all that you have done for this event. So as Sarah mentioned, I recently completed my term as SPSSI president. Given the constraints created by the COVID-19 pandemic, we have all worked hard to keep moving our organization and our mission forward, which brings us to this virtual event today. I'm really excited because we have 4 outstanding scholars, practitioners, and scholar activists with us today. So joining us from Yale University is Dr. Jennifer Richeson, the Philip R. Allen Professor of Psychology. Dr. Richeson's research examines multiple psychological phenomena related to cultural diversity. She published a piece in the September issue of The Atlantic entitled, "Americans are determined to believe in Black progress, whether it's happening or not," and recently won the annual award given by Sage Publishing and the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University for outstanding achievement in the behavioral and social sciences that advance our understanding of pressing social issues. Also joining us today is Dr. Kevin Nadal, a professor of psychology at both John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Dr. Nadal is considered one of the leading scholars on microaggressions, Filipino American identity, and LGBTQ issues in the US. Dr. Nadal's most recent book just came out entitled Queering Law and Order, LGBTQ Communities and the Criminal Justice System. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Nadal. Our next panelist is a rising star at SPSSI. Dr. Apryl Alexander was recently named SPSSI's 2021 National Institute for Teaching of Psychology speaker and was also the recipient of SPSSI's 2019 Michelle Alexander Early Career Award, which recognizes early career excellence in scholarship and service. Dr. Alexander is an associate professor in the Graduate School of Professional Psychology at the University of Denver. If you follow her on Twitter, you'll also know that Dr. Alexander is very active in Black Lives Matter 5280, the group working to build a violence-free Denver where Black people are valued, protected, and free. Our final panelist, Dr. Abir Aldhalimi, I practiced too. Okay, help me.
Aldhalimi. It's so much, it's easier said than read. Aldhalimi.
Aldhalimi?
Aldhalimi, yeah.
Okay. For the sake of this, I'm going to call you Abir. Is that okay?
Great.
Sorry. I practiced. I typed it out.
Please call me Abir.
Okay. She is a clinical psychologist with a background in trauma-informed care who has worked with refugees and immigrants and whose work today focuses on global mental health. As SPSSI's 2017-2018 James Marshall Public Policy Fellow, Abir worked in the office of Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire. Abir went on to complete an American Association of the Advancement of Science and Technology Policy Fellowship with the U.S. Agency for International Development. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here today. As you are all aware, these are trying times. Understatement of the day. We are experiencing a worldwide pandemic that has disproportionately affected marginalized communities. We are witnessing and participating in major protests against systemic racism and racialized violence. We are reckoning with the effects of policies that have adversely shaped the lives of immigrants and refugees. Just yesterday, a grand jury in Kentucky failed to charge any police officers with killing Breonna Taylor. As Dr. Melanie Price wrote in an op-ed in today's New York Times, police officers who kill citizens are rarely convicted. But in this tragic situation in which the woman killed was not only unarmed, but asleep in the moments before a police officer took her life, we hoped that for once, justice would be on our side. This is yet another disappointing reminder that it's not. At the same time, as though all of that is not enough, we are grieving over the loss of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and are now witnessing an epic battle over the future of the court that will have implications for marginalized communities for generations. There is much that psychologists are doing at the forefront of these issues, and much more that we can be doing. Moreover, there are many different ways to make a difference. So, to start us off, I'd like to ask each panelist to take a few minutes to tell us about what you're doing now to address some of the issues that we as a society are currently facing. How are you meeting this moment, be it through your scholarship, service, or activism? And how about, I'm just gonna go around my camera. So first would be Jen Richeson.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Sarah, and to all the panelists, and for everyone who showed up today. I just want to acknowledge how, given everything that Stephanie, can I call you Stephanie? Dr. Fryberg, President Fryberg, just laid out, you know, it's astounding that any of us is sort of upright and, you know, able to put words together. Today was incredibly tough day for me. I know for many of my students, just once again having to be confronted with the question of, or honestly, the blatant evidence that our lives don't matter to so many people. And, you know, our citizenship is constantly in question, and we're not equally protected under the law. In fact, it's often the law that makes sure we're not safe. So thank you for joining us on this session. It means a lot that you showed up. I just want to put that out there. So, what am I doing? I don't know that I'm meeting this moment, quite honestly. I am trying to do what I can, and what I can do is think critically about what we're facing, try to produce evidence that's rigorous and can shed some light on what is happening, to give people real answers, or at least a frameworks for thinking about what's happening in the world or to them. And if nothing else, try to cut through some of the noise that is so prevalent everywhere, regular media, social media, just people talking, to just say, no, this is actually what we know to be the case from science, from a perspective of social science, when we have answers. When we don't have answers, just questions, try to answer some of them. Try to use the tools of experimental social psychology, which is my field, to try to make what's seemingly random predictable, to help us really ascertain, for instance, why does it seem like for so many Americans there's a divestment from democracy right now? There's a willingness to just eschew small d democratic norms in favor of the pursuit or holding on to power. Why is that? What does that suggest about our psychology, but also our intergroup relations, and their answers to be gleaned from social scientific research? So some of what we're doing is trying to pursue the research, those kind of questions, but also how are people coping with the onslaught of vicarious racism, violence against communities? How do people manage their emotions in those moments? And if we don't have recommendations for how people can do it successfully, maybe we should be doing research on that kind of thing. So for me, I've always felt the need to, I guess, answer the call somewhat, or to be doing research that's relevant, that's timely. I always say to students, if your research matters to you, that's all that matters. And it turns out the things that matter to me, and luckily to my students, are questions that are critical for our nation, our world, to be the multiracial, multi-ethnic, interfaith, pluralistic, yet still democratic society that we could be, if only we would, give it a go.
Thank you, Jen. I think you're also highlighting how powerful narratives are, and that much of what we do as an academic is we drive home narratives. We try to push for what's real, what's accurate, and what's complete. Thank you. So next I'm going to turn to April. Do all of you mind if I call you by your first name? Is that all right? Okay, good. We want it to be a conversation. April, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, and thank you all for having me, and also having this platform. In answering this question, just providing a little context. So my background and training was in clinical and forensic psychology. So everything I'm doing now wasn't intentional. I just wanted to be a cute little forensic psychologist doing my thing. Entered the space and wanting to provide support to survivors of interpersonal violence and sexual violence, and slowly started merging into the world of individuals who sexually offend. So for a few years, I was working with adolescents who sexually offended. And for me, in doing that work, starting to learn about the myths of this population, that only about 4 to 5% of these adolescents with treatment go on to reoffend, but then seeing all the injustices that these kids who are not likely to sexually reoffend are going to be placed on the registry for the rest of their lives. We were still using isolation and confinement at the facility I worked in. Me as a Black woman going into a facility with majority Black youth every day was wearing on my psyche. And then you get home and the whole Black Lives Matter movement is going on. So it was this whole culmination of different factors in my life that were happening where I said, I need to do something else with psychology. I need to figure out, can I be engaged in policy reform for these youth and speak about this issue that I didn't even know about? I said, can I merge social justice work that I'm seeing with the Black Lives Matter movement into psychology? So actually moved to Denver 4 years ago and joined the University of Denver And they were committed to finding somebody who was doing that work too. So at the University of Denver, in our Graduate School of Professional Psychology, I teach a public policy and advocacy course now. I started teaching it my first year there, and I was like, oh crap, I don't even think I know how to teach this course. So the first few years was also learning while teaching at the same time. And I was strategic and purposeful in my first 2 years here in Denver of just wanting to learn about what was going on in the community. Whether that was showing up the spaces or taking people out for coffee, that I recognize that wherever I move, and I move around a lot, that community, I need to be embedded in it. I just can't be seeing clients in that community or doing assessments in that community without actually knowing it. And so through that, just started building connections, and we started bringing state legislators to my class. One state legislator, I met her at a advocacy happy hour, and she comes up to me and she says, hey, I'm running for office. I was a former geologist, a former volunteer firefighter, and I'm transgender, and I'm going to be the first transgender person in office in Colorado. And I said, who are you? And I was like, can you come to my class next week? And she did. And then months later, she actually won. So she is the first transgender state legislator in the state of Colorado. And so building those connections and seeing my environment and finding out spaces where I could step in. Spoke to an alum in our program, and I said, you know, what issues are going on in Colorado right now that I need to know about, that, you know, psychologists can have a space. And he said, you know, they're still doing conversion therapy here, right? And I was like, no, we spent 5 minutes on conversion therapy in grad school, so that's just a mess. I'm trying not to cuss. And we moved on. I didn't know that was a thing people still practice. And he said, yep, the bill got shut down. And I said, what can I do? And he said, show up next week and testify at the state capitol. And I go, okay, I didn't even entirely knew what that meant. And so I did. And the bill failed again. And I just kept showing up until that bill passed a year ago. So it was a lot of me just trying to figure out where I can insert this, this work together and merge psychology and social justice work together. And then through that and getting to know my community, I found Black Lives Matter 5280, which was the Denver movement for Black Lives, and just seeing all the work that they do. We have a community wellness squad, which is dedicated to helping just mental health and supportive mental health. We just launched a COVID displacement fund, helping people pay their rent as they're being evicted. We have an economic justice squad who is working on issues related to gentrification or making sure that individuals who are incarcerated for marijuana offenses can get that off their record eventually. And then I've been involved in the education squad. So all the issues related to the school to prison pipeline, which we talk about in forensic psychology all the time. So how do we make sure we're protecting our LGBTQ kids and our children of color in the school system so they're not overly criminalized? And then I think finally, our university started having a commitment to these issues. So they developed a public impact fellowship. Let's grab 20 professors throughout campus and teach them how to get their research out to the public sphere. So we had a year long of how to talk to legislators about your research, how to write op-eds, how to do news interviews. And that was just life-changing. Since the current Black Lives Matter movement, I've done over 60 interviews since the end of May. Been on NBC, CBS Nightly News, all the local news outlets. Had an op-ed published in the Denver Post talking about issues related to incarceration and COVID. And so, you know, there's so many different ways that I wasn't taught in grad school about how to use our science for the public good. Like really, not just your research sitting on a shelf, but getting your research and getting your clinical work and expertise out there. And that's what I love about this panel. You know, Kevin, we read his article in my public policy and advocacy class. So some of my students are here and super excited. Just seeing all these different models of ways in which we can engage our work to change things.
Thank you so much, April. As you were speaking, it really brought to mind for me, like, what is the purpose of the science we do? And I think sometimes we do science in the interest of learning about people, but sometimes we need to realize we do science in order to learn about people and to learn from them. And I think when you're out there in the community, it's exactly what you're doing, right? You're taking that time to let your work be informed by your interactions with people, by engaging the community, and really in a very sincere and earnest way, being out there as a social scientist and learning about those social systems. Thank you. So next we're going to hear from Abir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the panel. And I want to thank everyone who took the time from this really unique moment in history to join us for a conversation. So I think we all come to this with our personal issues and our personal beliefs and our personal experiences. And we choose the paths that we go on because of those very unique experiences that we have. Whether it's our identity or we've come across an experience in our lives, and that helps shape what we are passionate about and what we do, and hopefully what we do is what we're passionate about. And I have a feeling that my fellow panelists feel the same way. And so my family were a family of refugees out of the Gulf War. So I think by virtue of being Iraqi, I am political in the way that I think, and policy has impacted my life tremendously and changed the trajectory of my life, in that I'm an American. And here we are. This is what we do. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and a lot of my clinical work focused on immigration, immigrants, and refugees, and how do we think about treatment and help integrate refugees. And so I didn't know I was doing this, but a lot of my research, a lot of the grants I applied for, a lot of the publications that I did, a huge chunk of that at the end, I reserved it for how can this information be used for policy? How can this information be used by the community I was in, or by the university, or by the medical center? Like, maybe we need a specific refugee program, or maybe we need a specific primary care program for refugees that addresses their needs in an integrated healthcare model. I didn't know what I was doing was really policy. And so I finished my postdoc, and I figured out I wanted to go into policy during internship, and it took 1 year of intense research because they don't talk about this career path in graduate school. And so I networked and I met a whole bunch of people at APA, and I came across this SPSSI Marshall Fellowship, and I'm so grateful, and what a privilege it has been, because that fellowship helped me transition my career to policy, where I'm able to use my background, I'm able to use the research that I've done and all the clinical experience that I come with, but in a very different way. And so I had a lovely experience with SPSSI during that year, and I spent time in Congress with Senator Maggie Hassan, and I was her chief expert on mental health and refugee issues. And again, it was like the perfect opportunity for me to apply my science. So we did. I helped brief the senator and prepare her before her trip to the Middle East to talk about refugee camps. What a wild 360. Like, it was like a wonderful opportunity for me to, I mean, the senator didn't know it at the time, but everything that I worked for thus far has helped me prepare her for this moment. And I think that because I was coming at it from using all these different perspectives and these little nuggets of knowledge that I've accumulated over my lifetime, I was able to help her see the needs of refugees in that particular space. We also worked on opioids, right? New Hampshire is impacted heavily by opioids. So being able to make sure that mental health is integrated in the treatment of opioids in a science-informed way. So not like mental health services and opioid centers are two different things, but because I've had that clinical experience, I was able to move that bill, the language, the legislative language, to make sure that those services actually come and are co-located and they come together and are really integrated. And so we worked on we passed that opioid legislation, the major opioid legislation, with language that I helped craft. And that really was pulling from my clinical experience. And so I went on to the AAAS fellowship, and I was placed in the USAID, and I was given the portfolio, the inclusion portfolio. And so I was working on the needs of vulnerable populations, including Indigenous people, LGBTI people, youth, gender, and persons with disability. Nowhere does it say that I need to be a mental health expert. But I'm sure I don't need to kind of belabor the point that the portfolio is really positioned in a way where my mental health experience could help push those issues further and could help the coordinators that represent these issues independently of each other understand that there is actually more in common points that could be made here. And we hit on the issues of trauma-informed care. Nowhere does it say that the agency, that specific portfolio, the fellowship, they needed more information on trauma-informed care. But being on that portfolio and having that clinical experience, I was able to pinpoint that when we do interviews with vulnerable or marginalized populations, when we do meetings, taking a trauma-informed approach is really a do no harms approach and a principle that we need to champion forward. So I worked with them on crafting language on trauma-informed interviewing for vulnerable and marginalized populations. So I think in so many different examples, being able to shift that experience and have opportunities like these fellowships where I am placed in portfolios that didn't know that they needed me. They didn't know they needed a mental health person, but they benefited quite a bit because we were able to speak the same language. I was able to see their priorities and then fill in those gaps for them. And then in so many of these examples, I think we are championing social justice. It may not look like it when you're doing it, but I think when you get to go to these countries and have these meetings and people are doing it in a do no harm approach, we are so much closer to social justice that way. So that's pretty much what I have to say in a nugget. I'm sure there'll be like more thoughts, but I'll fill in those gaps as we have those conversations.
Well, you're definitely setting me up for the next question. Thank you very much. Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'm also just honored to hear all your stories and to, learn as well. And one of the things, my first reaction is like, wow, I'm not doing anything right now compared to all these other folks. I'm just struggling to survive right now, I think prior to the pandemic, I probably would have been able to share all kinds of sorts of things that I was doing regarding social justice and policy and actual advocacy work. Most of these days, it's a struggle to just even do anything. So I just want to name that. I don't know if other people are feeling similarly. I know that a lot of my friends and colleagues, we celebrate when we reply to an email because that's something that we did that day because there's a lot going on, and there's been a lot going on since, the dawn of time, but particularly since March, us worrying about, our health and our family's health, living in New York City, which was the epicenter of the pandemic at the very beginning, seeing lots of people close to me lose people that they know, losing a friend and colleague as well, hearing ambulances all around. And so I name that because I think part of being a good social justice activist, as well as a good psychologist activist, scholar activist, is learning how to take care of yourself. And so one thing that I learned earlier on in the pandemic is that I have to take care of myself. I have to take care of my family. I have a small child, a young child. And while I would like to be on the streets like I used to be able to do when I was 20 years old, marching till 2 a.m. in the morning, fighting, loudly and visibly. One, my body can't do that anymore as much. And two, I just don't have the capacity for that. And so I start with that, because I want to name that there are so many ways that people can do social justice work. You've just heard these other brilliant co-panelists talk about ways that you could do it, you know, with policy and with psychology and with research and that sort of thing. I also think parenting is revolutionary. Parenting your kids in a time like this, teaching them to know all of the things that we wish we knew when we were that age, knowing all of the research on things like internalized oppression and imposter phenomenon, and making sure that our kids don't have that as well. That's what my main mission right now is, especially during this time of pandemic. You know, sometimes I feel guilty that I'm not marching. If you knew the 20-something-year-old in me, like I would be there every night, nonstop. And sometimes I feel very guilty about that, but I also recognize now that, you know, I just can't do that. And so one of the ways that I try to alleviate at least some of that guilt is to do everything I can to support my friends, my siblings who are on the streets every night, making sure that they're well fed, making sure that they have money in their pockets, making sure that they have somebody they can call if they ever run into trouble, making sure that somebody checks in on them the next morning to make sure that they're safe. And so that's one of the more practical ways that I've committed to being part of the movement at this moment in time. I think if I look at, you know, some of the things I've done prior to the pandemic and prior to this current racial revolution, you know, I can say some of the ways that I've done my best to advocate for change on, you know, systemic and institutional levels. I think one of the things about being a scholar activist is that a lot of times people don't really realize all the types of work that we do behind closed doors. Every time we enter a meeting and you're the only person of color, the only woman, the only queer person, only trans person fighting against some systemic policy that has been in place for decades, centuries even. Every faculty meeting that we raise our hand to point out that something is problematic or discriminatory, and all of the pushback that we get to the point that, you know, we don't want to do it anymore. How many people of color have left academia because they're tired of being the only one? How many people of color have left academia because they've been pushed out? And so these are some of the other ways that we can be activists. So there's definitely the activism that many of us are familiar with, protesting, being on the streets, disrupting systems, and being vocal on social media and all those sorts of things. But there's also the ways that we can do this behind closed doors. And so, you know, I challenge folks to just sort of think about the ways the many ways that you can be an activist. I really appreciate, you know, hearing about folks who are working on policy as well as, you know, op-eds and media. And that's important. That's very important to use our scholarship as a way and our expertise as a way of advocating for issues. You know, a good friend of mine who is a on the street organizer, you know, had to remind me today that there are certain things that I can say with my PhD and the letters behind my name and the tenure security that I have, that other people might not be able to say and still keep their job. And so I view that as a responsibility for me to use my voice whenever possible, whenever I know that someone else can't say those sorts of things. And the other thing I'm thinking about is one of the other most important goals of mine during this pandemic is to take care of my students. I've met with my students, especially my students who work with me on my research lab, and I said, my main goal for you right now, or for all of us right now, is for you to graduate. I want you to finish your dissertations, your theses, your bachelor projects, all these different things. I want you to finish those things first before you do any other thing that, you know, our other research that we had been working on in the past. And I think for me, that's that's so important because so many students, especially students of color, and especially if you're students of color who come from first generation college families, or they would be the first generation college students, or come from you know, lower socioeconomic statuses, they don't necessarily have people that are fighting for them. And so if I could be somebody that fights for them, then I'm going to view that as something that is part of my my participation in the movement as well. I agree with what other panels had mentioned. Like, we don't get trained to be scholar activists. No program trains anybody to be a scholar activist, and we really need to change that, you know. And the way the APA is set up, and the accreditation process, you know, you have to have this class and this class and this class. Why isn't there a class that's required for all psychologists to be trained in basic ways to be scholar activists? You know, Apryl talked about, you know, testifying. Like, we're not trained to be to testify in court. And in fact, when the first time you ever testify in court is probably, for me, it might just be me, but it's the most horrifying, anxiety-provoking thing I've ever done in my entire life, because essentially you are putting yourself out there, and the opposing counsel is doing everything they can to discredit you. And you are basically standing up in court for whatever it is that you are arguing for. And that's a lot of pressure. And so I wish that there had been some training for that, that I may have had. And I think a lot of times people in, you know, counseling psych, clinical psych, social psych, we have all of this expertise that would make us great expert witness and to give testimony in court, but we don't do it because we don't see the possibilities. So in the same way that many people of color don't become professors because they don't know that's an option, many people of color who do get their PhDs don't go into these types of side gigs because they don't know that that's a possibility. And so, you know, these are some of the things that are on my mind. I'm curious and excited to hear other ways that people are thinking about how we can be activists. But I think the last piece that I'll share for now is challenging, you know, people within our own families and communities on ways that they might be complicit to any number of things, whether it be systemic racism, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia. Like, that's activism too. And so those are some of the conversations that we don't want to have, but sometimes we have to have them. And you know, we sometimes have to walk away, but sometimes we have to at least know that we tried. And then the last piece that I wanted to make sure I shared was, I'm sure right now across various campuses and workplace institutions, you have some diversity committee that's forming or was in existence, but now is all of a sudden back in place. I was very overt and said, no, I'm not doing that. And the reason why I'm not doing that is because when I wanted to do all of this stuff 5, 10, 15 years ago, you weren't interested, and now you're interested. And so I really am looking for allies, accomplices, if they really are allies and accomplices, to do all of that work that many of us have been trying to do for such a long time. So I'm definitely happy to step back and let other folks do that sort of work. I'll definitely come in and say something if they're not doing it correctly. However, you know, they can do all that work too. So that's part of my self-care, is saying no to the diversity committees.
Thank you, Kevin. I really want to highlight a couple of things that you said. I mean, one, the importance of humanizing the work that we do, right? And that starts from recognizing that within our own research families, right, we have to take care of them. And we have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care, because so much of what we do is both looking out within our academies or within the organizations we work. And often we're fighting within and then having to turn around and fight outwardly. And there is a way, I think about my research team and how when everything blew up in March and they all got kicked off campus and, you know, everybody's research got stopped. And I mean, we spent a good 4 to 6 weeks where we checked in twice a week. We didn't do any research meetings. We just got on, everybody turned their camera on, and we just needed to see each other's face and remind each other that we're going to be okay. And I actually think that, you know, our team has been really productive But I think it's in large part because we've taken care of each other. And, I think we've grounded ourselves in the belief that we do this for difference, for exactly what's going on in the world, to bring to light the experiences of marginalized communities. I mean, as a Native person, as an Indigenous woman in the academy, I feel like all I do is fight. And then I look out into the world and we're just fighting to exist. And sometimes it's so painful and angering and you just feel exhausted, right? And you do feel like you're on a struggle bus. And have we been doing this pandemic thing long enough yet? Like, I have. I'm ready to be done. Let's be done with it. Can we just call it off? Like, literally 6 months. They say that's kind of when you hit the wall hit, done, right? So I really appreciate you bringing those issues to light. It's so important for all of us to keep that in mind. So I really want to come back and think about, when we want to use our science, one of the most difficult things in society right now is that science is being politicized, right? So science is absolutely central to so much of what the public and policymakers are grappling with, from racialized violence to COVID-19 to climate change, right? All of these things are affecting our lives right now. So I'm wondering if each of you could speak to how science is being used and politicized, right? And the way and what we need to do to pull back from that, to shape public discourse and action. And I'm gonna just kind of mix it up. And so how about this time, April, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think right now in this moment where we're having these tough conversations about, COVID-19, the pandemic, police violence, everybody's now catching on to our cool psychological buzzwords. And I know there's been a few recent articles about this. So everybody needs to say intersectionality now, but they don't use it appropriately. I think another one, all the schools are allegedly doing trauma-informed care, but I walk in there within 5 minutes and can point out how they're not doing trauma-informed care. We have to be woke now, so let's do implicit bias training for everybody. What does the research say on implicit bias training right now? And so I think there's this wanting to catch up to a lot of our work and a lot of our terminology, but not really understanding what that means. And so again, that's a place where we need to kind of step in and talk about this. And so I've been trying to do that like more and more within our community. And then also us saying, I don't know, when we don't know the literature. And so yeah, people are reaching out more and more. Just a month and a half ago, I was appointed to by the Denver City Council to the Citizen Oversight Board. So let's talk about policing and topics related to research in policing and what we know and don't know, because there's a lot of things that are out there that just don't work. And so in this era where we're talking about reform, which we've been doing for decades and that doesn't work, or some of the ideas that people are coming up with, we have a lot of those answers within our field in all of our different kind of subfields. So can we kind of scaffold and guide people to the science and also talk about the gaps? We have so much quality training in our programs in research and program evaluation. So where can we step up and start putting ourselves in that position? And that's one of the reasons why I did apply for the Citizen Oversight Board. I'm like, I know some of this. I think I can contribute a few things that would help aid our communities in figuring out these issues. And so, finding out where your talents and your abilities and all these psychology skills can be applying to different areas is just so important. And again, helps to clarify all of the politicization of science that's currently going on in our systems.
Does anybody feel like they have a point that would draw, or should I just keep going?
I would jump in if that's okay. Yeah, one, I agree with everything April just said. And I think, as social scientists, with specific skill sets and tools and knowledge, we are not quite uniquely, but close to uniquely prepared for doing this very work. And I think doing it with a very high level of integrity and clarity, and to exactly as April said, to speak on what we know, but also be clear about what we don't know. Don't overreach. And, as has already happened even in this exchange, to say, to clarify, when you say something that's interpreted how you didn't mean it to be, to say, no, that's actually not what I said, or that's certainly not what I meant to say, and to try to clarify, because I think it is, everything is so polarized, and we are poised to hear whatever's being said and filter it through our own, you know, priors. And I think trying to, you know, do the best one can to build, if you're creating it or curating it, a body of knowledge that is sound and, you know, clear and, you know, univocal in what in the message, you know, is one, you know, avenue, but also, yeah, not to overreach when you're talking to policy people, when you're putting things out in the media. You know, we don't know everything, and so we probably shouldn't be talking about everything, but we do know certain things, and certain things extremely well, and we have great evidence for, and yes, we should be saying what we know. And, you know, that I think we have an obligation to do so.
Abir, I saw that you wanted to jump in.
Thank you. So, you know, it's a good thing that I waited until after April and Jennifer to say what they just said, because I agree 100% with them. I think it is really a moral imperative that we join the conversation. But I like to challenge the idea that science is now politicized. I'd like to challenge that idea. I think science has always been political, and the way that legislation and policy work is at the intersection of political priorities and evidence. And that is not, that hasn't changed. And how do you, now knowing this, how do you make sure good science gets in there? And that's by, you know, I don't want to over, you know, emphasize. I think a lot of what Jennifer and April just said, I think that's where it fits right here. That's when you speak what you know, you contribute based on your area of expertise. And it may come in different ways. It may come in ways that we're not used to. It may come in op-eds. It may come up to calling your senator or your congressperson and say, hey, I've noticed that this is an area that you're quite interested in. I'm an expert in that. Do you want to talk? Also, I'm a constituent. Really helps. And so being able to get a seat at that table, being able to bring in your expertise and apply it, because science has always and will always be political.
I agree with that completely. And one thing that what everyone said has brought up for me is that people who don't like the type of science that we produce are always going to find something to criticize it on, right? So it used to be that, you know, 30, 40 years ago, when all these pioneer multicultural psychologists, people of color, started to do this research, the critique would be like, your sample sizes are too small, you're not using Western models, you're not using the right statistics, qualitative doesn't count, and all these different things of ways that they were trying to do research. Nowadays, we are doing research exactly the way that they do it, and even better, but there's still going to be critiques on those things. And so it's not so much that your science is wrong or bad or flawed. I mean, yes, there definitely can be ways that we can all improve our science, but we also just have to recognize that some people are just going to be combative for the sake of being combative. So we have to continue to do what we're doing, continuing to do things ethically, continue to do things that we're passionate about, and you know, continue to tell the stories and to advocate for the types of issues in science that oftentimes are either neglected altogether or done wrong. And so, you know, if there are young researchers that are watching this right now, I hope you don't get discouraged by any of the haters who try to say that your research isn't important. We've all heard that, right? We've all heard people say, well, that's not real science, or why do you focus so much on race, or all those different things. I don't know why I used that voice, but I did. But we all got that, and you just got to keep on going. because they're going to find something, you know. And what's interesting, you know, even if you take it outside of you know, racial issues or social justice issues, or you know, and now we're seeing people fighting against things like climate change or COVID-19, or you know, it's like that just supports this notion that it's not just that they're anti you know, research focused on or uplifting communities of color or other marginalized groups. They're really just anti any science that doesn't match what they want to hear. And so, you know, again, I hope that folks just keep on doing the good work, if even if they do hear some of these critiques that are unfounded.
Right, you're making me realize it's not simply that science is political, but that our very existence as scientists from marginalized communities is political. Our very existence is political. And, you know, forever, I mean, really within the academy, we've been pushed out because it wasn't a voice that people wanted to hear. We're still fighting for space in the academy, for intellectual space. We're still asking for a seat at the table. And really the academy is a microcosm of society. I mean, it's really not different. I love when people think I go back to my Indigenous community and people think I live this glamorous life and and really I spend all my time in the academy feeling like an outsider and pushing to get space and pushing to be seen as a full human being. It's wild. Like there's definitely ways in which not only is it about politicizing, but it's about what it means to take it to the public sphere, which leads to my next question. So I'm wondering if each of you can talk about sort of why you engage in the public sphere, right? And what you think the role of psychologists are. And I just want to note here that you all do it in very different ways, which is what makes this such a great panel. Some of you are writing op-eds, giving congressional briefings, advocating for change on the front lines of protests, working in the government, right? Like each of you, I'm just looking at you and thinking you are the best example of the many different ways that psychologists can be in the world. So maybe you can share, you know, why do you choose to engage in the public sphere in the way that you do? And, you know, why is it important that psychologists be in those spaces? How about Kevin? Can you go first this time?
Sure. You know, hearing that question, you know, it's so connected to what you had just mentioned before about going back to your community and people thinking you live this glamorous life, because this is the reason why I do it, because I have been fortunate enough to be able to represent my community or my various communities. Not many people I know outside of my academic world get to have PhDs, get to write books, get to have, you know, these opportunities that, you know, I've for whatever reason, I don't want to say like I'm lucky because that's an imposter phenomenon, but I was lucky in some way because, you know, I just met the right mentors and the right people to push me. I really don't think there's anything that special about me other than having, you know, great mentorship and people who push me in directions. And so I bring that with me everywhere. And I think, you know, for many of us, that responsibility to our communities, that responsibility is especially when you're the only one or one of the only ones to always represent your community well, to always fight for your communities because you know that they might not have access to that seat at the table. And maybe we ourselves don't have access to that seat at the table, but maybe we know somebody that might give us an invitation to get to that table. You know, that's the very reason. I also think about just this idea that if I can't fight for my community, will I trust someone else to fight for them if they're not even from or even understand, you know, some of the dynamics in our community. So this idea of the table, you know, and, you know, Shirley Chisholm, I brought up this idea of, you know, bringing your folding chair to the table. But for me, it's like also just like, can we also build our own tables? Can we build, does it have to be a table? Can it be something else, you know? And I think for me, that's why I do this. And it's, you know, for people that get it, they get it. And then sometimes I'll share this with colleagues of mine who don't necessarily feel connected to communities in that way. You know, and I'm just like, I sometimes wish that I could just be a professor who taught and went home and that was it, right? I don't really wish that, but my stress levels wish that, right? And so, but for me, it's because it's part of, you know, my people, my ancestors run through my soul. And so I have to fight somehow every single day in order to, you know, just to do my part. Like, so I feel like in many ways, like this is the responsibility that I've been given. And then at the same time, I just want to name also is that sometimes you're doing all of this, and then sometimes there are people from your own communities who don't think you're woke enough or don't think you're activist enough or all those other things. And so we are balancing all of these different stressors from all ends. You know, I just want to, if you feel that way, I just want to name that, because I think that's real, that's normal. But again, we still have to just keep fighting the good fight, finding your support systems, and just knowing that, you know, we all can get through this together.
Great, thank you. Abir?
Sure. Everything that Kevin said here resonates so deeply with me. I think I have been incredibly privileged to have come from those experiences as a child, to be able to have met the right people, the right mentors, and be in situations where my parents were able to overcome a lot of what they've seen and protect us and all of that to get to this point and be able to do that. So it feels like I survived, many have not. And so I have this responsibility to be able to I don't want to speak for them, but to able to share my experience, and hopefully my experience can address some of the concerns that we have and some of the justice issues that we experience as people of color. And so I hope that I can contribute in that way. And that is why I came to the realization that I wanted to be involved in policy. Now that I'm here, it changed just a little bit. Now that I'm here, I realized, and I'm working more in like the global mental health space, there are no psychologists here. Go ahead, look at it. All of these programs that are specific to psychology, provision of mental health in different countries, academically speaking, programmatically speaking, building programs, mental health programs, working with other countries that want to bolster their mental health on a system level. Psychologists are not at the forefront of these initiatives. They're just, I don't know where they are. I look for them all the time in these meetings. I love our colleagues in social work. I love our colleagues in nursing. I love our colleagues in global health. And they are the ones at the forefront of the mental health programming in this space. So now that I'm here, it feels like I'm carrying everything that brought me here. But I also feel like this is a wide open space with very few people that have a degree in this that are setting the agenda. And if the last year feels a little different for me now that I've recognized that, and it has made me recognize that, no, we need more psychologists. There's 109 people here. And so I'm telling you, there's an abundance of opportunities to get involved in global mental health. Please do. Please do. I know that there are probably many that have questions on how to do that. And maybe that is a topic for a different webinar. But I would really encourage my fellow psychologists to be more active in the global mental health space, because we are not setting the agenda. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm sticking around.
No, Abir, before, so after we go through Jen and April, when I get to the last question, I am going to ask you to inspire, maybe give a little bit of how people get involved, because I think there are a lot of psychologists out there who would like to know, how did you find yourself there?
Okay, absolutely.
Jen?
Sure. Yeah, just want to co-sign everything that's been said before, and just say, I guess, just want to reassure people on the call that you don't have to be everything all the time, and you don't have to somehow be both things all the time, scholar, activist. I certainly see myself primarily as an academic. You know, that's what I am. And I think I produce knowledge that is that sometimes is really relevant for what's happening in the world often, but certainly in our nation, and could be incredibly relevant for policy, if nothing else, garnering support or not for specific policies. And at those moments, I think it's a responsibility for people like me, and sometimes for literally me, to weigh in when the evidence is there. So that's, you know, in terms of my sort of academic, scholarly sort of, you know, activism self, right? There's a whole different Jen Richeson who's sort of activisty, but that's, you know, like as a citizen, which is a whole different story. You know, so I think it's important for, you know, I've been doing this for 20 some years, but, you know, post PhD. So I was not always doing all of these things. I was mostly doing the things you do to get a job and then keep a job, you know, as an academic, and that's okay, you know, especially if that's all that you can manage, given the need for self-care, given the need to just, yes, get your degree, get the PhD, graduate, get the job, stand there. In fact, I never really thought I would be an academic, quite honestly. You know, no one in my family had PhDs. This professor thing is like, wait a minute, what, people do that? I mean, literally, I didn't consider the possibility of getting a PhD until I happened to have a Black female faculty member from my first one in my junior year of college, one of only two that I had the whole time. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, what? I can do that, right? And just embodied this possibility for me. But I didn't intend to stay in academia. I figured I'd well, I was trying not to go out the back door and embarrass my mama, but I figured I'd go off and do something else at some point, work for a nonprofit. And honestly, the only reason why I stayed in and I continue to stay in is so I can be that embodiment of what's possible as a Black woman in the academy for younger students, you know, undergraduates, you know, graduate students, say, yes, you too can do this, and open doors. So that part of my activism, I guess, is constant. These other parts are, you know, weighing in responsibly when I can, because I can. And as Abir said, the policies are being made anyway. The conversations are being had anyway. The question is, are we going to be in on the conversation, or are we going to cede that ground to the economists? Quite honestly, literally the questions that I'm weighing in, it's either all economists, sometimes they let a sociologist say something, but it's not us, right? There's no council of psychological advisors, right? There's a council of economic advisors that decide a whole bunch of stuff, right? And the economists are deciding all kinds of things. And in fact, they're making decisions about the very policies that have given rise to the conditions that are either making our lives hard or maybe could make our lives a little bit better. So given that's, you know, who's setting the table, to extend the metaphor, then we need to talk to them, you know, or at least be in the room to push back a bit, you know, on what's being said if it doesn't quite match with our experiences, or more importantly, our data, not more importantly, as importantly, our data, and, you know, say, look, I have a different view and here's why, and this is what I think, and sometimes you win the day. But I think if we're not in on it, then, you know, we have no say. And, you know, just to, you know, sort of go back to the personal, but also the field, like you know, social psychology, you know, is up and down in terms of its involvement in social issues, but it's founded on a commitment to social issues, social justice, concerned about the Holocaust, concerned about racial inequality, prejudice. And so I think my involvement in these issues is as mainstream as possible in this field. And I'm not gonna apologize for it. I mean, and you think about the legacy of Kenneth and maybe Clark, right? I mean, like, that is just, you know, social scientists doing work that matters for our society. And that work we know is just fundamentally influential in the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And that is why I'm here, because of that decision, right? So to me, it's paying it forward, right? Doing the work, continuing the fight to work on this society and making it what we all, at least expressly, say it should be in our written values.
Thank you, Jen. April.
Yeah, kind of why do we do the, or, you know, why do I do this work? You know, it's been an odd summer for so many reasons, and, you know, people come up to me and they thank me, and then I get really weird because I know it's psychologically, I probably know it's a choice to engage in the work that I engage in, but for me, it's not a choice. Breonna Taylor was murdered and there was no justice yesterday. So that recognition that, you know, that actually could be me. So I don't have a choice but to be doing this work right now in this moment. So I don't see it as an option for me. And then, you know, second of thinking to something Kevin said earlier is fortunately and unfortunately, because I am Dr. Apryl Alexander, people are more likely to listen to me. Again, I've lost sleep over that. Why would you listen to me versus the person in the community telling you what the problem is? Lost incredible sleep over that. But unfortunately, it is what it is, that our degrees and our knowledge base is a privilege. And so I need to use that privilege appropriately for the communities that I serve, the communities that are being harmed, and that may include my community, that might not include my community. So I do see our work as a privilege. And then last, my students. My students keep me going. My students reach out. Seeing being able to work with the next generation of folks who are going to make even grander changes than I'll make. Definitely like keeps me going. When that first generation student, I'm a first generation college student, walks into my office and looks at my degrees, and they're not even paying attention to what I'm saying because they're like, wait, that could be me. That's something. So knowing that we're also contributing to future generations of knowledge, I think is the one thing that does keep me optimistic and keeps me going in this work.
Thank you. All right, well, we're gonna do one last question. And Jen Richeson, trigger warning, I'm gonna say the word hope. So our lives, right, were radically transformed by COVID-19 more than 6 months ago. And there are really few indications that our lives will return to normal anytime soon. Calls for justice in the wake of George Floyd's murder have sounded largely unheeded for almost 4 months. It can sometimes feel like we've hit a wall, right? And it's 6 months out, we're feeling this wall, right? For some, there's little reason to hope for better times or for progress, right? Can each of you leave us today with a few words to inspire hope and to help us stay the course, even when everything is so difficult? So Abir, I'm going to start with you because I think I haven't had the opportunity to.
Thank you. So I did was thinking about this. This is a tricky one, just because it's going to be incongruent with how people feel and how people are seeing things right now. So I want to acknowledge that. But the way that I've been thinking about it is, you know, this country is flawed. We can all agree that there are flaws. The history of this country, there's so many flaws. But there are sparks of hope about this country. There are things that this country has done that has been really wonderful for some people. And I'll just talk about my own personal experience. I'm an example of that a little refugee girl living in a refugee camp can come to a country and pursue whatever she wanted to pursue and do all of these things that got her to sit next to a senator and work on issues that are much bigger than her, that definitely spoke to social justice. And I don't think that that's completely gone from this country. I think there are elements of that continue to inspire us to get engaged, and then there is some path forward. In other countries, being able to speak in the way that we do, protest in the way that we do, and say we don't like this or that, or that's not the case for a lot of other countries. So we get to say how we feel and what direction we want this country to go in. And that gives me a little hope. I also get kind of like a, higher level. I know there have been a lot going on, and that's why people are engaged. But I think a lot has been going on for many years. Social injustice has been going on for many years. And people are more in tune to social injustice now. And as much as like it gets annoying because they're using some of the words wrong, you're using some of the concepts wrong, they're open to having that conversation. And there are more people engaged on these issues, and that gives me a lot more hope. So I think the kind of seeing these elements, and we can all agree, there are some things that are absolutely flawed, events that are absolutely flawed. That gives me a little bit of hope and be a little bit more future oriented. Lastly, what also gives me a little hope is that there are 107 people here. There are people that are going to see this, that people that are engaged and want to be involved. And I'm not sure if you wanted me to go into like examples of how people can get involved yet, but there are ways. First of all, being here and raising your awareness is the first step. So amazing that we have this platform and we can exchange those ideas. Writing op-eds, really, I can't underscore like how important that is, because you're sharing your knowledge. Reaching out to your local congressperson, your senator, you have no idea the power that you have as a constituent. Please exercise that. Sarah has amazing workshops on policy and communication, and I'm going to plug Sarah's work here, and Sarah's the expert on this, and everything that I know Sarah taught me, and through her work and through conversations, and I've been so lucky to be involved with SPSSI. So being able to hone in those skills and being able to sharpen those communications so that we aren't sending 40-page documents. we're sending one document and we're telling them what to do and what our recommendations are. I think all of those are very good first line of how to transform our expertise and help it impact policy.
Thank you. Jen Richeson.
I was excised from this conversation. So, okay, well, can I give people hope? I don't, so my story on hope is, I think it's overemphasized. I don't know whether it matters if I have hope or not, but I do have belief. And I believe in us. I believe in people of goodwill. I believe in social science and the work that we do to forge a lane to show us, what is going on, why we are creating what we're creating. If we don't like it, how we can undo it. And so I guess, yeah, should people have hope? I think that's up to you. What I would encourage you to have is belief and a plan, and to get to work, and to, stay the course, and to, really stand up and fight. I mean, I guess my, quibble with hope is it feels like it's, the same thing I said in my piece about it's going to happen anyway. So you don't have to be in the fight. It's like, no, it might not happen. We might not actually keep this democracy together, right? We might not, but you know what? If we care about it, just like anything else, we need to stand up and fight for it. And we need to, bring whatever resources and tools to bear, both our science, but also our voices and our bodies to stand up for what we believe in. And so, yeah, belief. And I have faith. I am, what I proudly call part of the Christian left in the, tradition of Martin Luther King, but also my family, right? So I'll be calling on the ancestors every now and then too. And both, those not with us who fought every single, each of their generations, they fought. I am a descendant of American slavery, right? All of those generations fought for me to be here and to do what I do. So yeah, I have faith in that. I also have, you know, faith and an obligation to fight because of my parents who are still living, who went through Jim Crow, who fought to desegregate schools and, you know, the lunch counters. I mean, you know, I talked to them about this moment and how, you know, it feels somewhat different, but somewhat the same. And you know what? Yeah, that doesn't inspire hope, but it sure does inspire anger, and anger inspires action. And so, you know, I invite everyone who's called to feel whatever they want to feel. If hope does it for you, yay. But whatever it is that brings you out from, you know, feeling small and alone and isolated and, you know, despair, like I don't encourage that either. Whatever brings you out of that and into the game, you know, into the fight, feel that. You know, and come join us and let's work together to, like, you know, create something that we really would feel proud of and want to be a part of.
Some of my favorite academic moments have been uncorked with Jen Richeson. We just gotta keep it real and be out there and tell them the truth. Apryl.
I'll do some validation of Jen's feelings because there are so many periods yesterday and today where I don't feel hope in this moment, and that's real, and that could be real for a lot of different communities who keep experiencing these injustices repeatedly, to not feel hope or believe in hope. But then there's other days in my week where I do see hope and change because it's happening. You know, I spoke to a reporter in January just talking about kids who are calling the suicide hotlines and getting resources for peers and things like that. And during that, it was a whole conversation on, you know, should police be responding to these calls? And I'm like, why are we criminalizing suicide? A kid's feeling suicidal and you're sending a police officer? I was like, I don't think that's right. And I got a lot of side eyes during that conversation. But fast forward 6 months later, now everybody's talking about police divestment and not sending police to certain calls. And she didn't get to finish the story back then, and then came back around. She's like, oh, a lot of what you said, now it's trendy. And I was like, yeah, catch up to me. And so, you know, some of our things won't be as trendy or popular, but sometimes people come around, that people are now more than ever. The Black Lives Matter movement's been around since 2013, but people showed up this year. So, you know, people call and they say, what are you going to be doing this summer? I was like, the same thing I've been doing for the last 4 years. And so some of this is being sustainable in this movement. I love Dr. Abir had said earlier, what is your action plan? And so at the end of my public policy and advocacy course, they have to write an advocacy plan. You learn all these different ways in which you can tap in, but not all of them are going to work for you. Direct action looks different for everybody. So yeah, again, some of us might not be out in the protests, but what else are you doing in your community or with your science? So everybody sit down and develop your action plan. What can you do now? People are always asking me for the answers, and I'm like, no, you know that. I could give you recommendations, but only you know what you're gonna do in your environment. So sit down and plan that. What is your action plan to do this change and do this work? Yeah, we can give you some advice, tips, and tools, but ultimately it's going to be up to you and your investment.
Thank you. And Kevin.
Can I just say ditto to all of that? I mean, everything that everyone said is just so beautiful, and I, you know, wouldn't really add too much. But one thing I really want to reiterate was what Jennifer mentioned in terms of just, you know, the ancestors. I've had lots of folks say things like, you know, our ancestors had been through so much worse and all that sort of thing. But when you're in it, you don't want to hear that, right? But when you can connect to that, like, I think we have to connect to that because, you know, so many people did fight for us to get to where we are today. You know, we have to remember that we have to fight for the future. So I think about my son, I think about all my nephews and nieces, I think about all these folks that we have to fight for them to have the life that they deserve. And like I said before, like, you know, we're learning so much each generation. We have this knowledge of how we can make our kids' lives better and easier in some ways. I hope that we could do that on all fronts. So not just, you know, the ways that they feel about themselves, but in the way that society might potentially treat them. And so doing our research, that's what keeps me going. I don't love the word hope, but I do love the word action. And that's what I want to continue to do. And something that I know I'm never able to do is to look back at the fact that we have had small incremental change. It's hard to do that, especially when there's so much hurt and pain. But if you look at certain moments in time, like I think personally, like 7 years ago, majority people in this country hated all LGBTQ folks. And now majority of people are like, oh, all right? Which is a big change and is, you know, actually something that we have to at least acknowledge. And so while there's still so much work we have to do with that particular issue and community, that, you know, we hope that we could look at some of those incremental changes. I said hope, but we do have to look at some of those incremental changes and just sort of like reflect on that, not celebrate it, but reflect on those things. And that might help us to keep going, because we do know that for some things, some of those things might be working in some way.
So before I turn it over to Sarah, who's going to share some information about how you can find the recording online, I just sincerely want to thank you all for taking time out of your chaotic COVID-19 filled lives to come out here and share your wisdom with us. In my native tongue, there's a word, bichaliquad, and if we say spisi bichaliquad, it means spisi from our hearts. And what I am inspired by is, I think today you spoke from your heart. And I think so much of what will give us hope is when we keep listening to our hearts and continue to be inspired by people like you who bring us together and give us reason to get up every day and to fight for our children and to fight on the shoulders of our ancestors. And so I just, with all gratefulness, thank you for being here tonight. Sarah.
Yes, I echo Stephanie's sentiments 100%. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. This was really special. And I know many people were really upset that we had to cancel the SPSSI conference this past June. And so this was really a moment for us to come together and be one as a community in this moment. I want to let everyone know that I'll be uploading a recording of this video to SPSSI's YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/SPSSI. I'll send it out to everyone who RSVP'd for this webinar. And we have a number of other webinars coming up on reproductive justice methodology, on ageism and COVID-19, and on homelessness. So if you get emails from SPSSI, you'll get emails about those. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook to find out about all the different SPSSI events and funding opportunities. And thank you so much again to everyone. And I wish everyone a good evening.